Why was everyone laughing at her the moment she walked in? The brass bell above the door chimed sharply, cutting through the smell of gun oil and stale arrogance that clung to the air. Rachel Winters stood there for a moment, motionless, as if weighing whether she should even take another step inside. Her orange street sweeper uniform caught the light from the dusty window. It was worn, smudged with road grit, and the honest stains of work most people ignored. In her left hand she held a small clear plastic bag, a pistol inside, scuffed, old, strange markings along the slide. And that was all it took. The laughter began from the corner, low and sharp. "Hey, hey, hey," came a booming voice. "Public restrooms are across the street, sweetheart." The voice belonged to Big Mike, owner of Mike's Tactical, a man who looked more like a bouncer than a businessman. Tattoos wrapped his forearms like vines of anger. Behind him, a group of regulars, men with shaved heads, tactical shirts, and overconfidence, laughed in chorus. Troy, the loudest of them, whistled mockingly. "Maybe she thinks this is a thrift store. Look, she even brought her own trash." Rachel said nothing. She just kept walking toward the counter. Her steps were slow, deliberate, eyes forward. No apology in them, but no defiance either. Just the calm of someone who'd walked through worse rooms and heard worse words. But the air shifted. There was something beneath her quiet demeanor that unsettled even the most oblivious of them. The narrator's voice would soften here, almost reflective. What none of them realized was that the woman they were mocking had already buried more men than they had ever known. She set the bag on the counter. "I found this in the trash," she said simply. "It's different. Thought maybe someone should look at it." Big Mike snorted. "Trash belongs at home, get out." The men grinned, circling closer like hyenas who'd found easy prey. One of them reached for the bag. "Do you even know what this is?" Rachel's gaze swept the store, fast, clinical, unnoticed by all but one man sitting quietly in the corner. Her eyes marked exits, distances, obstacles. She saw everything, every angle, every threat. The old man in the corner, a veteran, judging by his posture, frowned slightly. He'd seen that look before. Lisa, the only female employee, hesitated. "Maybe I can help her, Mike," she just. "No," Big Mike's voice was final. "Get this crazy woman out of here." The bag was snatched from Rachel's hands. Troy pulled out the pistol, eyes widening. "Hey, this is HK Mark 23 SOCOM variant," Rachel said quietly. "You shouldn't touch the trigger." The laughter came again, louder this time. "Only Navy SEALs use that type," one of them sneered. "You Googled that, lady." Big Mike slapped the counter. "Listen, trash collector, I'm giving you 10 seconds to get out before I throw you out." The narrator's tone tightens, the room heavy with tension. She adjusted the strap on her shoulder, a small, subtle shift of balance. Her stance changed. No one noticed. No one but the old vet. He leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "That's not fear," he thought. "That's preparation." Mike's voice thundered. "One." "I just want to know about the gun," Rachel replied softly. "Two." He grabbed her collar, and that's when everything changed. Her hand moved faster than anyone could see. A twist, a shift, a precise lock that sent the massive man's wrist cracking under its own tension. Mike roared in pain, stepping back in shock. "What the hell?" Before he could finish, two others lunged. Rachel pivoted smoothly, using their momentum, turning chaos into choreography. One punch swung wide, redirected into another attacker's ribs. The scuffle lasted maybe 4 seconds. Then silence. 3 men on the ground. Rachel standing still, breathing steady. The narrator's voice drops to a whisper. The street sweeper had just dismantled 3 trained men without breaking a sweat. The veteran rose slowly from his chair, his eyes locked on Rachel. "That's MAGA," he murmured. But Big Mike was beyond listening. Rage had taken over reason. "Hold her," he shouted, "now." Phones were recording. Customers pressed closer, a storm of ignorance ready to erupt. And through it all, Rachel's face remained calm, controlled, but her eyes, there was pain in them. Not fear, pain, like someone who had promised herself never to fight again, now being forced to break that promise. The gun on the counter vibrated, a faint hum, almost imperceptible. Rachel's eyes flicked to it instantly. "This weapon has a beacon," she said quietly. "Someone's tracking it." That single sentence drained the laughter from the room. "What?" Troy stammered. Rachel picked up the weapon carefully. "Ghost 77 Alpha," she read from the faded serial etching. "This belonged to Captain." The old veteran froze. He went missing 4 years ago. Everyone looked between the two of them. The name was legendary. The tension snapped like a cable. The front door burst open, glass shattering. A tactical team flooded in. "Freeze, nobody move." The sound of safeties clicking filled the shop. Mike's face went white. I'm the owner. This is a misunderstanding." The team fanned out, professional, efficient, cold. Then their commander entered, scanning the room with sharp precision. Colonel Hayes. His gaze locked on Rachel. His posture shifted. Something about her froze him mid-command. They stared at each other, soldier to soldier. Rachel slowly placed the pistol on the counter. No sudden movements, just deliberate calm. Her sleeve pulled back, revealing a faint tattoo, the outline of a winged skull. The veteran gasped. "My God, that's a ghost unit mark." Hayes removed his helmet, disbelief etching his features. "We found it," he muttered, eyes never leaving Rachel. "But who are you?" Her answer came steady, quiet, unflinching. "You might want to secure the perimeter," she said. "The beacon, been active for 12 minutes. Whoever lost this knows where it is now." Then the sound that silenced everything, helicopter rotors thudding outside. The windows shook. The air changed. Lisa's phone rang again. Her face went pale as she listened. "Mike, Fort Liberty on the line. They say General is." The door exploded open again. This time it wasn't a team. It was one man. Dust-covered fatigues, 4 silver stars on his shoulders, eyes that carried wars behind them. "General Thomas." Gasps rippled through the store. Hayes snapped to attention. Every soldier in the room did the same. Rachel stood still. His gaze found her, and the world seemed to stop. "Rachel," his voice cracked. "Phantom 7, you're alive." The entire room fell into stunned silence. Phones lowered, breath held. The street sweeper they'd mocked was not just military. She was a legend, a ghost from a classified unit erased from history. Big Mike stumbled backward, his face drained of all color. Troy whispered, "No way, that's not." But then 4-star general, commander of special operations, dropped to one knee. Right there, on the grimy floor of his own humiliation. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice breaking. "I'm so sorry for leaving your team behind." Every head turned toward Rachel. Every doubt vanished. Colonel Hayes saluted sharply. "Silent Storm Commander, ma'am." Rachel closed her eyes for half a second. The weight of years pressed against her. The ghost she'd buried clawed back into memory. The narrator's voice softened here, slow, emotional, deliberate. In that small gun store, surrounded by the men who had mocked her, the world learned what true strength looked like. It wasn't loud. It wasn't proud. It was quiet, relentless, the kind that doesn't need to shout to be heard. Rose's voice trembling. "We have a situation. Delta teams pinned down, same sector where," he stopped himself. Rachel finished it for him. "Kandahar Sector 7. He nodded. "They have 4 hours before they're overrun," he said grimly. "And you're the only one who knows those paths." The silence was absolute. Lisa whispered, "Silent Storm, that's the unit that vanished in Kandahar." The veteran's voice broke the stillness. "They said no one survived. 40 enemy combatants, 8 operators, building rigged to blow." I saved 4, Rachel said softly. I couldn't save the others. Her hand trembled for the first time. Then she looked in the eye. You want me to go back? He nodded once. You're the only one who can. Rachel exhaled slowly, the sound of a woman weighing the price of peace against the cost of duty. I sweep streets now, she said finally. It's honest work. More honest than the people who sent us there. But the decision had already begun forming behind her eyes, the old instinct awakening, the gears of training turning in silence. The narrator's tone drops low, contemplative. Somewhere between the ridicule and the revelation, she remembered who she was. Not a hero, not a killer, just someone who couldn't watch others die when she could do something about it. The lights from the chopper outside painted streaks of dust across her face. Rachel turned toward the door, her shadow long and unbroken. Show me the live feed, she said quietly. Let's bring them home. And with that, the woman they'd mocked for her uniform, her silence, her humility, stepped back into the war that had once broken her. Not for glory, not for revenge, but because the mission still mattered. Because 12 soldiers were about to die, and she refused to let them. The narrator pauses, soft music swells. Sometimes strength hides in plain sight. Sometimes the quietest person in the room carries the loudest past. Why did the world's quietest woman suddenly sound like someone used to giving orders no one dared question? Inside Mike's tactical, chaos transformed into command. Within minutes, the cluttered store became a makeshift operations center. Tactical displays unfolded, cables snaked across the counter, encrypted tablets connected to satellites, radios crackled to life. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, throwing harsh reflections off glass cases still filled with untouched rifles and dust. And at the center of it all, Rachel Winters. She hadn't raised her voice once, but every word she spoke reshaped the room. Move that display case, she said, and Colonel Hayes himself did it. Plug the uplink directly into the main line, she added, and 2 operators scrambled to obey. The same men who had surrounded her in mockery now stood at attention, waiting for her next word. The narrator's tone grows slower, reverent. Some leaders command by rank, others by fear, but the rarest kind, they command by presence earned in blood, silence, and the unshakable weight of experience. Rachel stared at the live satellite feed now streaming on the central screen, a flickering bird's-eye view of Afghanistan's Sector 7. The landscape looked familiar, dry valleys, sharp shadows that hid both salvation and death. But to her, every rock had a memory. Every slope whispered the names of her fallen team. Hayes leaned closer to the display. Delta's pinned here, he said, pointing to a red cluster on the valley's northern lip. Heavy contact, lost radio after last transmission. Rachel's eyes followed the map without blinking. Your route is wrong, she said. Their fallback path leads into an old supply tunnel it collapsed 4 years ago. She traced a different line on the tablet, fingers swift, confident. They need to go south, through this narrow pass. It's the only way they'll make it before nightfall. Nodded slowly. That area's hostile, anti-air coverage is too thick, ground approach is near suicide. Rachel's tone didn't change, unless someone knows the ghost paths. The room quieted, even the machine seemed to pause. The old veteran in the corner whispered, "She's talking about the tunnels, the ones from nightfall." Rachel didn't respond. She didn't need to. Everyone who understood, understood. Lisa, trembling but still trying to keep up, handed Rachel a fresh tablet, the latest intel feed. "Ma'am," she stammered, "Fort Liberty confirms enemy patrols in the valley are shifting every 40 minutes." Rachel's mind moved faster than her fingers. She was already calculating the window. "Your data's 3 hours old," she said softly. "At dusk, they'll shift pattern again. If Delta moves north, they'll walk right into overlapping kill zones. South's the only path open. The narrator's voice adds quiet awe. This wasn't guessing. This was memory forged in trauma, clarity built from surviving where others died. His face was tight with guilt and urgency. The Pentagon's authorized full command. Any resources you need, they're yours. Rachel looked at him for a long moment. Any resources? Yes. She nodded. Then I need silence. Everyone except command out. Her words landed like a command detonator. Even the soldiers hesitated. Hayes opened his mouth, then closed it again, gave a single nod. You heard her clear the room. Within seconds, Mike's tactical moments ago a scene of laughter and arrogance, emptied of its bystanders. Only Hayes, Lisa, and Rachel remained. Rachel's gaze softened as she looked around. You've got 22-year-olds trapped out there, sir. Kids, scared, wounded. Her voice grew quiet. They volunteered because they believed they could make a difference. I won't let them die for someone else's oversight. Met her eyes. You don't have to do this. I do, she said. You know I do. A long silence, the kind filled with years of unfinished apologies. Then Rachel pointed to a set of equipment crates. We'll need to reestablish comms. Hayes, bring the field router. Lisa, get me a clean line to Captain Williams. Lisa froze. Delta's co. Rachel nodded. He's alive, I can feel it. That line lingered in the air. I can feel it. The narrator pauses, then continues softly. To outsiders it sounded impossible, but for soldiers who'd been in the dark, whose teammates' lives depended on instinct more than intel, that phrase made perfect sense. She could feel it because once she'd been him. The store hummed with quiet purpose. Hayes's men set up the uplink, signal strength flickering from red to green. The connection stabilized, and a crackled voice came through the static. Delta lead copy, this is Phantom. Rachel hesitated only a fraction before finishing the call. This is Phantom 7, do you copy? The line went silent, then disbelief. Ma'am, Phantom 7, is that really we thought? Reports of my death were tactically convenient, she said calmly. Give me your sitrep, Captain. Williams' voice came fast, tense, exhausted. 2 wounded, 1 critical. Ammo at 30%. Surrounded from north and east. We have maybe 2 hours before they mount full assault. Rachel's fingers danced across the tablet, marking enemy positions from memory and instinct. No, you've got 30 minutes. They're waiting for technicals to reposition. Once those guns come online, it's over. Listen carefully. Every word out of her mouth carried weight. Command, precision. Do you see the rock formation at your 2 o'clock? Looks like a camel's hump. Affirmative. In 20 minutes the sun will hit that ridge. Shadow line will cover your approach. Move your wounded to the base of that formation. It's deeper than it looks, goes back 40 feet. Defensible. 1 way in, 2 ways out. You'll hold there until I reach you. There was a pause. Ma'am, that formation reads as solid rock. Rachel's voice was absolute. Your intel is wrong. I lost 2 teammates finding it. Saved 4 using it, trust me. Static, then a reply steadier now. Copy that, Phantom 7, moving. The voiceover tone rises with slow intensity. And just like that, across continents and time zones, one woman in a dusty gun store was directing a battlefield 10,000 miles away. Watched her with quiet awe. Hayes had stopped pretending to understand. Even Lisa, who'd been terrified moments ago, now moved with purpose beside her. Rachel's presence filled the space, not through volume but through gravity. Hayes spoke quietly. Ma'am, QRF's prepped, on standby, ETA to Fort Liberty, 15 minutes. Rachel's eyes didn't leave the map. Route. Standard LZ south of the ridge. She shook her head. Negative, too hot. Redirect them through grid Charlie 7. Low radar cross-section, dead zone on thermal scans. I'll meet them there. His brow furrowed. You're not planning to. I am, she interrupted. I'm going in. The silence after that was heavy enough to hear the ticking of the store's wall clock. You'd be alone, Hayes said. She nodded. One person can move through the ghost paths, a team can't. Looked like he wanted to argue, but he stopped. He'd learned long ago that once Rachel made a decision, there was no stopping her. Only history could. I need 3 things, she said. Direct satellite link, medical standby with O-negative blood, Williams, critical won't make it without transfusion, and, she hesitated just for a heartbeat, keep my name out of it. What? When this is over, she said quietly, I go back to sweeping streets. No medals, no press, no resurrection of Phantom 7. I had my war. This is just cleanup. His throat tightened. Rachel. That's the deal, sir. Her tone made it clear. It wasn't a request. It was a promise. The narrator softens here, tender, heavy. This wasn't a hero coming back for glory. It was a survivor returning to the scene of her pain, because she couldn't stand to see someone else fall into it. Hayes broke the silence. Transports inbound, ETA 6 minutes. Rachel nodded. Then in one slow movement she peeled off her orange street sweeper jacket. Underneath, a black t-shirt. Her arms bore the ink of her past, the ghost unit insignia surrounded by 8 names. Her fallen. The shop fell completely silent. Even Big Mike, hiding near the back, stepped forward with trembling hands. I'm sorry, he stammered. We didn't know who you. Rachel turned to him, eyes calm, voice like steel wrapped in silk. No, you didn't know, but you showed who you are when you thought I was powerless. That's the measure of a man, how he treats someone he thinks can't fight back. Mike's face crumbled with shame. Troy couldn't even look up. Rachel folded her uniform neatly and handed it to Lisa. Hold this for me. I'll need it when I get back. Streets don't clean themselves. Then the low thump of approaching rotors filled the air. The shadow swallowed the parking lot outside. The narrator's tone builds, cinematic, stirring. The street sweeper was gone. The phantom was rising again. Opened a case, reverently pulling out her old gear, armor plates cracked and mended, field-worn, preserved like relics. Rachel ran her hands over them. You kept this. We kept it for a hero, he said. She didn't reply, just strapped it on, efficient, silent. Outside, the helicopter kicked up a storm of dust and debris. The air smelled of oil, sweat, and memory. Reached out, Rachel, bring them home. She looked back only once. Tell Captain Williams to hold position 20 more minutes. Phantom 7's coming. And then she stepped into the night. The door swung open, wind howling in, paper fluttering, dust swirling around her like ghosts welcoming their own. The narrator's voice slows to a whisper, poetic, reverent. Some people wear their purpose on their sleeves. Others bury it deep, under layers of pain, until the world calls it out again. She didn't walk toward the helicopter for medals or orders. She walked because somewhere out there, 12 soldiers still believed someone was coming. The rotor wash blew her hair back, the dust swirling like firelight around her boots. She climbed aboard, the door gunners watching her like they'd seen a myth come alive. Inside the shop, Big Mike stood frozen, watching the woman he'd mocked walk into a storm for people she'd never met. Lisa clutched Rachel's folded uniform like something sacred. And the old veteran, tears running silently down his face, raised a trembling salute. The narrator's voice finishes the part softly, emotional, grounded. Not all heroes wear the colors of their wars. Some wear orange uniforms and sweep the streets we walk on. But when the world needs saving again, even the quiet ones remember how. Why did the quiet hum of the helicopter sound like a heartbeat she'd heard before, the rhythm of another life she'd tried to bury? Inside the vibration rattled through Rachel's boots, up her spine, awakening memories she had spent 4 years trying to silence. Every beat of the rotor blades whispered names: Williams, Tours, ghosts carried on the wind. The crew chief glanced back at her. He didn't speak. None of them did. They'd been briefed. The woman in the corner seat wasn't to be disturbed. Rachel sat still, helmet in her lap, eyes fixed on the darkness beyond the open ramp. Afghanistan waited somewhere in that void, half a world away, and so did the pieces of herself she'd left there. The narrator's tone quiets, almost intimate. Sometimes returning to war isn't about duty. It's about ghosts refusing to stay buried. The pilot's voice crackled through the intercom. "Ma'am, General says the tactical feed's online. Direct link to Fort Liberty." "Patch it to my HUD," she replied, her voice calm, clipped, precise. "And tell him to keep medical standing by with 4 units of O-negative. The casualty won't make it without them." She slid the helmet on, the world narrowing to the glow of digital overlays, topographic grids, heat signatures, shifting enemy movements. Lines of red and blue pulsed across her visor like veins in a living map. The crew chief handed over a battered equipment case. Inside lay her armor, the same set she'd worn the night the world believed Phantom 7 had died. The ceramic plates were cracked and mended with field epoxy. The vest smelled faintly of smoke and earth. She ran her fingers over the scars in the material. "Still holds," she murmured. The narrator adds softly. It wasn't nostalgia. It was ritual, the act of putting on a skin she thought she'd shed forever. The banked sharply east, rotors carving through night air. The terrain display on her visor shifted, mountains, valleys, ghost paths remembered by muscle more than memory. 2 minutes to LZ, the pilot called. Rachel tightened her harness, checked her sidearm, felt the weight settle against her thigh, familiar, steadying. Her fingers brushed the pocket of her vest, finding the photograph folded there. 8 faces smiling in desert light. Half of them gone now. "For you guys," she whispered. The helicopter flared for landing, dust erupting in a storm around them. Before the skids even touched, Rachel was out, dropping into darkness, boots sinking into loose sand. Then the lifted, vanishing into the night sky, leaving her alone. Just silence, wind, and the hum of the earth under her feet. The narrator's tone deepens. That's how legends move, quietly. No fanfare, no audience, just a heartbeat, a mission, and the knowledge that failure isn't an option. Miles away, in the gun shop now turned command post, every screen tracked her movement. Big Mike leaned against the counter, unable to look away. The old veteran stood beside him, eyes glistening. Lisa whispered, "She's really doing it." On the thermal feed, Rachel appeared as a single white dot moving across jagged terrain. Her pace was impossibly fast, efficient, almost inhuman. Troy muttered, "How's she even seeing where she's going?" The veteran answered without turning. "She isn't seeing what's there now. She's seeing what used to be there, every patrol, every ambush. She remembers the ground better than it remembers itself." Back in the field, Rachel crouched behind a ridge, scanning ahead. The valley below was a maze of rock and shadow. In the far distance, faint muzzle flashes flickered, Delta Team's last stand. She activated her comms. "Delta lead, this is Phantom 7. Distance 1 click south-southwest. Status." Static, then Williams' strained voice. "Taking sporadic fire. Martinez critical. Enemies massing North Ridge." Rachel studied the thermal overlay. "Negative. You've got 30 minutes before full assault. They're positioning technicals for suppressive fire. When it starts, you move. I'll create a diversion." "Ma'am, you'll be outnumbered." "Outnumbered doesn't matter if they can't see you," she said. She adjusted her rifle, a suppressed marksman platform tuned perfectly to her hands, and began her approach. Every step placed with intention. Her movements were fluid, economical, the product of thousands of hours spent surviving impossible nights. The narrator breathes the words slowly, reverently. She wasn't running toward danger. She was moving toward duty, the only compass she'd ever trusted. 40 minutes later, she reached high ground overlooking the valley. Through her scope, the chaos below unfolded. Delta's position dug in behind fractured stone, muzzle flashes like fireflies in the black. Dozens of enemy fighters surrounded them, confident, closing in. Rachel's voice cut through the static. "Captain, in 15 minutes, fire everything you've got at grid 774. Don't aim to kill, aim to make noise." "That'll leave us dry, ma'am." "Good. When you're empty, fall back to the crevice I marked earlier. No stops, no questions, move fast." "Understood." She exhaled slowly, aligning her first shot. The narrator's tone turns razor-sharp. When she pulled the trigger, the war remembered her name. A single crack echoed through the valley. One hostile drop, then another. 7 shots, 7 kills, each one deliberate, each one dismantling leadership, communications, command. Confusion spread like wildfire among the enemy ranks. "Delta, move." The feed in the gun shop exploded with motion, heat signatures shifting south. 12 soldiers carrying wounded, retreating into shadow. Leaned closer to the display. "What's she doing?" Hayes swallowed hard. "Drawing them off, she's making herself the target." In the valley, enemy forces redirected instantly, flooding toward her last firing position. Gunfire raked the ridge she'd already vacated. She moved downslope unseen, using terrain folds invisible to drones. Smoke grenades hissed, covering her trail. A burst of gunfire cut through the haze, then silence. Rachel whispered into her mic, "Delta, report." Williams' voice came back ragged. "In the crevice, 2 wounded stable, enemy sweeping north." "Stay dark," she said. "I'll bring you the cavalry." The narrator's voice softens, reflecting admiration and sorrow. Every command cost her something. Every order was another step into the memories she tried to forget. But there was no hesitation, not now, not when lives hung on her steadiness. On the satellite feed, her single heat signature disappeared completely. For several seconds she was gone, swallowed by the mountains. Then she reappeared on a new vector, closing on the enemy flank. She crawled through gravel and thorn, every movement measured in silence. Above her, 2 enemy fighters scanned the slope with night vision optics, unaware that death waited 10 feet below. 2 suppressed shots, brief flashes, no echoes. They dropped soundlessly. Rachel continued upward, closer to Delta's position. The enemy's confusion deepened. Fire spread in every direction, undisciplined, frantic. In Mike's tactical, the veteran whispered, "She's rewriting their entire plan by herself." Lisa's eyes filled with tears. "She's buying them time." Rachel reached the mouth of the crevice, narrow, almost invisible. Inside, 12 soldiers huddled in exhaustion, eyes wide as she emerged from shadow like an apparition. "Ma'am," Captain Williams gasped, "I can't believe." "Believe it later," she said. "Move your wounded deeper, we're not safe yet." She dropped beside the medic, checking Martinez. One look told her the truth. The kid was dying. "How long?" she asked quietly. "An hour, maybe less." Rachel nodded. "He'll make it, he has to." The narrator slows, voice heavy with empathy. She said those words before, to other medics, in other valleys, knowing sometimes belief was the only medicine left. "Captain," she said, "I need 2 volunteers who can still run." 2 soldiers stepped forward without hesitation. "Good, plant these charges at the points marked here. Don't fight, set and get clear, I just want noise." They nodded and disappeared into the dark. Rachel turned back to the others. "When you hear the explosions, we move south through the ghost paths. Stay close, carry the wounded, anyone who falls behind." "Dies," Williams finished grimly. She gave a single nod. "Exactly." Minutes crawled by. Then distant thunder. The charges detonated in sequence, echoing across the valley. Enemy forces panicked, splitting their attention. "Now," Rachel ordered. The team moved 12 soldiers and their phantom guide slipping through terrain that shouldn't have been passable. Rachel led them through cracks in rock barely wide enough for a man, over ledges that vanished into darkness. Behind them, shouts and gunfire filled the night. Twice they froze as patrols passed within arm's reach. Rachel waited, motionless, hand raised for silence. The enemy moved on. At one point, an exhausted soldier stumbled, gasping, "Ma'am, I can't." "You can," she said softly. "One more step, that's all, one more." And somehow he did. The narrator murmurs. Leadership isn't loud. Sometimes it's just a whisper that refuses to let you quit. They reached the final ridge before extraction, 500 meters of open ground, a killing field. The sound of helicopter rotors reached them faintly from beyond the hills. Rachel looked back at the team. "Hold here, I'll clear the route." Before anyone could protest, she was gone again, sliding into the shadows ahead. On the command screen's voice tightened. "She's walking into the open. Jesus, she's clearing it alone." Hayes whispered, "She's not walking, sir, she's hunting." Through her scope, Rachel spotted 2 remaining hostiles, rearguard, waiting with RPGs. She exhaled once, squeezed twice. Both fell. "Route clear," she said. "Move now, fast." Delta burst from cover, sprinting across the open valley, carrying their wounded between them. Behind them, the enemy's pursuit grew louder, closer. Swept in low, door guns spitting fire, carving walls of dust and lead. The valley became chaos, explosions, shouts, light. Rachel hauled Martinez's litter herself, dragging him the last meters to the helicopter. The crew pulled them aboard. "Everyone accounted for," Williams shouted. "Ma'am, get in." Rachel looked once more toward the ridge, toward the ghost still buried there, then climbed aboard as the lifted off. RPGs exploded in the dirt below. Inside the cabin, medics worked fast. Blood transfusions, compression, adrenaline. Martinez's pulse fluttered, then steadied. "He's stable," the medic breathed. Rachel leaned back against the wall of the helicopter, closing her eyes. For the first time in years, she let herself breathe. The narrator softens, reflective. 12 lives saved. One soul reminded that purpose never truly dies. It only waits for the right reason to wake again. Delta team sat in stunned silence around her, eyes wide with awe and gratitude. Captain Williams finally spoke. "Ma'am, I don't know how to thank you." "Don't," she said quietly. "Thank me by living better, train harder, think smarter. Don't make someone else die to save you." The rest of the flight passed in silence, the kind filled with meaning words could never hold. Far below, the valley burned. Above it, in a streaking toward safety, the legend of Phantom 7 lived again, not for fame, not for glory, but for the simple duty of bringing them home. The narrator concludes the part softly, almost a whisper. Sometimes the greatest victories happen where no cameras reach, carried by those who don't need the world to know. Rachel Winters didn't come back to prove she was alive. She came back so others could be. How do you return to a world that buried you and act like nothing happened? The touch down at Fort Liberty under the first light of dawn. The sky was a dull gray, painted with smoke and distance. The rotors slowed, the dust settled, and for a few moments no one moved. Inside, the rescued soldiers sat in silence, 12 men alive because of one woman who wasn't supposed to exist. Rachel unbuckled her harness, her movements slow, deliberate. The adrenaline was fading now, replaced by that old, familiar ache, the weight of survival. The narrator's tone lowers, gentle but heavy. For some, coming home is a relief. For others, it's another kind of battle, the one fought against memory itself. Captain Williams was first to speak. "Ma'am, we owe you our lives." Rachel gave a small, tired smile. "No, you owe them," she said, nodding toward the wounded laid out beside him. "You just live, that's enough." The crew opened the side doors. Medics rushed in, stretching stretchers, shouting vitals, moving like lightning through ritual chaos. Rachel stepped onto the tarmac, blinking against the early light. For a brief second, she looked like she didn't belong there, a ghost caught between worlds. General was waiting. He didn't salute. He just looked at her, the kind of look men give when words aren't enough. "You brought them home," he said quietly. Rachel nodded. "They did most of the work." "Don't do that," he said. "Don't pretend this was luck." She didn't answer, just looked past him at the base, the hangars, the runways, the flags half raised in wind, the same landscape she'd sworn she'd never see again. Behind her, Captain Williams approached. "Sir," he said, turning to, "if it's all right, I want to file my report personally." Nodded, "Go ahead." Williams looked at Rachel. With her, she deserves to sign it. Rachel froze. "No," she said softly. "I don't sign things anymore. I was never here, remember." Williams frowned. "With all due respect, ma'am, that's wrong. The world should know." She cut him off with a glance, not angry, just tired. "The world already knows too many names that died for nothing. Let this one stay quiet." The narrator adds softly, the voice steady, reflective. Glory didn't interest her. She'd seen what it cost. The flag might wave for victory, but it never saluted the nights spent shaking in silence. She turned to, "You keep my word, General. No mention, no resurrection. I go back to my life." He looked at her, jaw tightening. "After what you just did, that's impossible." Rachel's eyes hardened. "Then make it possible." The air between them thickened with unspoken history. The guilt of a commander who'd watched her team die years ago, and the defiance of the soldier who'd survived it. Finally sighed, "You'll get what you want, but I need one thing first." She raised an eyebrow. He gestured toward the medevac bay. "Walk with me." They entered the hangar, the metallic scent of fuel mixing with blood and antiseptic. The rescued team lay in a row, doctors working quietly. Martinez, the critical one, was alive, pale, weak, but breathing. Stood at the foot of his bed. "That boy's life, you bought it. Don't tell me you don't matter anymore." Rachel looked down at Martinez, barely 20, freckles under dirt and sweat, a bandage around his chest where the bullet had missed his heart by half an inch. She whispered, "He reminds me of Tyler." Tyler asked. She didn't answer, just turned away. The narrator's tone falls to a hush, like a confession. Tyler, the youngest on her original squad, the one who didn't make it out of Nightfall. She carried his dog tags in her pocket for years before finally leaving them buried in the sand. Followed her into the corridor. "I know what you're doing. You think staying invisible is atonement." Rachel stopped walking. "I'm not atoning, I'm surviving. There's a difference." He shook his head. "You deserve more than this." She smiled faintly. "Deserves a word I stopped believing in a long time ago." For a moment the general said nothing. Then quietly, "You should know, word's already spreading. Command intercepted your live feed. The footage is circulating." Rachel's voice dropped. "How far?" "Too far to stop. People saw Phantom 7 return. They saw what you did." The silence that followed was heavier than gunfire. The narrator's voice darkens. She'd saved 12 soldiers, but in doing so, she'd awakened the ghost she'd fought to bury. The world that once forgot her was now remembering too loudly. Rachel exhaled slowly. "You need to shut it down." "I can't," said. "By morning it'll be everywhere." She stared at him, disbelief, exhaustion, resignation all crossing her face. Then it started again. "What has?" She turned toward the hangar doors, watching the sunrise break through smoke. "The circus, the interviews, the myths. They'll make me a story instead of a person, and when they're done, they'll forget the next soldier who falls." His voice softened. "You think people don't need heroes?" "They need truth," she said. "Heroes are for posters, truth is for healing." The narrator breathes the next line slowly, like a heartbeat. "She fought in 2 wars, one with bullets, one with memory, and the second was always harder. A few hours later, she sat on a steel bench outside the base chapel, still in her dusty gear, helmet beside her. The air smelled of diesel and prayer candles. Lisa approached quietly, carrying a small paper cup of coffee. "I didn't know if you'd want one." Rachel accepted it without looking up. "Thanks." Lisa sat beside her. "Everyone inside's talking about you, the rescue, what you did, they're saying." "Let them say it," Rachel interrupted softly. "Stories make people feel safe. Reality doesn't." Lisa studied her profile, the dark circles under her eyes, the distant focus that never rested. "You don't like being remembered, do you?" Rachel smiled faintly. "People remember the wrong parts, the medals, the kills. They never remember the shaking hands that came after." The narrator whispers. That was her curse, to be extraordinary in a world that only rewarded noise, not silence. Lisa hesitated, then asked, "So what happens now?" Rachel looked out toward the flight line, where helicopters shimmered in the heat haze. "Now, I go back to the gun store, sweep floors, clean glass, watch people who never seen war argue over calibers they'll never fire." Lisa frowned. "You can't just—" "I can," Rachel said. "Because that's peace, Lisa, ordinary days, noise that doesn't kill." They sat in silence for a long time. Then Lisa said softly, "You know, I used to think strength was about being loud, commanding, visible, but after seeing you," she trailed off. Rachel turned to her. "Strength isn't loud. It's choosing to keep going when no one sees you. It's walking into fire knowing it won't make you famous." Lisa's eyes glistened. "Is that what this was for you, duty?" Rachel shook her head. "Closure." The narrator pauses, then continues, voice steady but breaking just a little. "Because sometimes closure doesn't mean forgetting. It means accepting that some scars aren't supposed to fade." Inside the chapel, stood at the altar, watching them through the window. He pulled a small drive from his pocket, the mission footage. Rachel's voice, her commands, the battlefield. He could have sent it to the Pentagon, to the press, to the history books. Instead, after a long breath, he placed it in the offering box and walked away. The next morning, headlines around the world buzzed. "Unknown operative leads daring rescue." "Ghost unit rumors resurface." "Who is Phantom 7? But none of them had a name. None of them had a face. Rachel was already gone, back to her small apartment above a garage. Back to quiet mornings sweeping sidewalks while the rest of the city rushed past her. She'd saved 12 lives. She awakened a legend. And she'd chosen to disappear again. The narrator softens to a near whisper. "It takes strength to fight a war, but it takes greater strength to walk away from one." Days later, she returned to Mike's Tactical, the same door, the same counter, but now every person inside froze when she entered. Big Mike stepped forward, eyes red, voice unsure. "Welcome back." Rachel gave a small nod. "Floor's still dirty." They all smiled nervously. Lisa stood behind the counter, eyes bright. "We kept your gear locked like you asked." Rachel looked around the store, the rifles, the chatter, the ordinary noise of peace. "Good, let's keep it that way." Then from behind her, a child's voice broke the silence. "Miss, were you the soldier on TV?" Rachel turned. A boy stood there, wide-eyed, holding his father's hand. She crouched down to his level. "No," she said gently, "that was someone else." "But you look like her." Rachel smiled faintly. "A lot of people do, but if you ever meet her, tell her to rest." The narrator holds a soft, emotional beat. "She lied without guilt, because heroes don't live in headlines. They live in the quiet choices no one sees." As she stood, the morning light poured through the glass, washing over her face, turning the scars on her hands into lines of silver. His voice echoed faintly in her memory. "You can't erase what you are." And in her heart she answered, "Maybe not, but I can choose who I am today." She turned back to the counter, grabbed a mop and started cleaning. Just as she had before, only now, every sweep of the floor sounded like peace. The narrator closes the part softly, with the rhythm of a heartbeat fading into silence. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do isn't fighting. It's forgiving yourself for surviving. How long can a ghost stay hidden when the world is searching for a hero? It began quietly, a pixelated clip, a broken transmission. A woman's voice calm, commanding, cutting through the static of chaos. "Trust me, move south, I'll bring you home." Those 6 words spread like wildfire. Uploaded, translated, shared across every network within hours. No face, no name, just that voice. The narrator's tone lingers, soft, deliberate, building tension. And for reasons no algorithm could explain, people believed her. They believed in her. Within 2 days, military analysts across nations were dissecting the footage. Within 4, journalists were calling it the Phantom Directive. And within a week, soldiers around the world whispered her again, Phantom 7. In a small city far from headlines, Rachel Winters swept the same floor she always had, unaware that her voice was echoing in briefing rooms she'd never see again. Big Mike flipped on the morning news, the television crackling behind the counter. "Breaking story," the anchor said. "Leaked mission footage believed to show a long-deceased ghost unit operative leading a successful rescue in Afghanistan. The identity of the operative remains unconfirmed." The camera zoomed in on the audio waveform, that steady, unflinching voice. Mike froze, his mop clattered to the floor. Lisa turned slowly toward Rachel, heart pounding. "That's you." Rachel didn't even look up. "No, that's someone who sounds like me." The room fell silent. The narrator's tone grows quieter, edged with sadness. Denial wasn't for deception. It was for survival. The world was waking up to a story she'd spent years trying to bury. Later that evening, she sat in her small apartment above the garage. No medals on the walls, no pictures of her past, just silence. On her kitchen table, a cheap laptop glowed faintly. Every feed, every headline carried her ghost. Phantom 7 returns. Unidentified female operative outmaneuvers insurgents. Pentagon silent. Rachel scrolled through them without expression. The noise outside was deafening speculation, hero worship, conspiracy. And under it all something else, fear. She clicked one clip. It showed the aftermath of her mission, Delta Team safe, saluting an unseen figure. Her voice played over the footage, low and unshakable. "Hold the line, breathe, you're almost home." She closed the laptop, sat in the dark for a long time. Then she whispered to herself, "You said you'd never go back." The narrator's tone slows, reflective, heavy. But the past has a cruel way of calling back the ones who already paid their debt. 3 days later, a black SUV pulled into the alley behind the store. 2 men stepped out, plain clothes, government gate, the kind of presence that filled a space before it even spoke. Lisa saw them first. "Rachel," she whispered, "they're here for you." Rachel didn't turn. She was stacking boxes behind the counter, her hands steady. "Keep working," she said softly. "Act normal." The bell over the door jingled. The men entered, scanning the room. One flashed an ID. "Department of Defense, we're looking for someone." Mike cleared his throat. "Lot of someone's come through here." The man's eyes narrowed. "We're investigating an unauthorized comms breach linked to this location. Classified operation, Fort Liberty. You wouldn't happen to know anything about that, would you?" Rachel didn't move, didn't blink, just kept restocking a shelf. Lisa swallowed hard. "No, sir, we just sell gear here." The second man, older, observant, studied Rachel. His gaze lingered on her hands. Calloused knuckles, faint scars, a soldier's posture that civilian years couldn't erase. "You," he said, "you served." Rachel looked up at him. "Once." "Where?" "Does it matter?" He smirked. "You tell me." A long silence stretched. The first agent shifted, impatient. Then Rachel's voice cut through, calm as ever. "If I knew anything about your leak, I'd tell you, but I don't." The older agent nodded slowly. "If you do, tell them this. Command's looking for the one who gave those orders, not to punish her." He paused. "To protect her." He turned, motioned to his partner, and left. As the door closed, Mike exhaled like he'd been holding his breath for an hour. "Protect her, my ass," he muttered. Rachel just stood there motionless. Then finally, "They're not lying." Lisa frowned. "What?" "They protect what they can't control," Rachel said. "Because control, what keeps them safe." The narrator's tone deepens. She wasn't afraid of being hunted. She was afraid of being owned again. That night she packed a single bag, no weapons, no medals, no past. Just a few clothes, a photograph, and a folded letter she never mailed. The letter was addressed to. It read, "You kept your word once, keep it again. Let the dead stay buried." Lord. She left it on her kitchen table. Then she vanished. No one saw her leave. No one saw her arrive anywhere else. Only the faint camera footage from a roadside diner at 3 a.m. A woman in a gray hoodie paying cash for coffee. That was the last anyone saw of her. The narrator pauses, tone soft but weighted. Some disappearances are escapes. Others are goodbyes too quiet for the world to notice. Weeks passed. The legend of Phantom 7 only grew. Talk shows argued over her identity. Veterans wrote essays about leadership. Young recruits quoted her words like scripture. And in the middle of all that noise, a single shaky video appeared on the deep web. A lone soldier from Delta Team, Williams, had uploaded his personal footage. No filters, no edits, just raw memory. The clip showed the rescue from his helmet cam. The camera shook violently as he crawled under fire. And then her voice. "You're not dying here, not today." Then a hand, hers, reaching into frame, dragging him to safety. No face, just strength. That video hit harder than all the news reports combined. It didn't glorify her, it humanized her. People saw not a superhero, but someone stubborn, relentless, heartbreakingly human. The narrator's voice warms with quiet reverence. That was the thing about Rachel Winters. She didn't need to be seen to be felt. Meanwhile, far from the noise, Rachel had found work on a coastal dock 2 states away. She repaired boats, hauled ropes, kept to herself. Salt air, simple days, the kind of silence that didn't hurt. Sometimes she'd stand at the edge of the water at dusk, the wind in her hair, the gulls crying overhead, and wonder if the world still remembered her. She hoped it didn't. But one evening, as she sat by the dock, a familiar sound broke through the wind, the low thump of a helicopter. She looked up. A hovered low, distant, then turned inland, a military convoy heading somewhere else. Rachel smiled faintly. "Good," she whispered, "someone else's turn." She reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out a small object, a dog tag, dulled with age. "Tyler." She held it tightly, then finally, after years of carrying it, tossed it into the sea. The tag hit the water with a faint splash and vanished beneath the ripples. The narrator speaks softly, with ache and admiration. That was her ceremony. No cameras, no speeches, just in silence and the choice to let go. Back at Fort Liberty, General sat alone in his office. On his desk was a photo, Rachel with her old unit, years ago. He told the higher-ups she was gone again, a ghost, a file marked deceased, confirmed. But he kept one thing alive, her lesson. At every briefing, he told new recruits, if you hear a voice that sounds calm when everything's falling apart, follow it. That's what leadership sounds like. He never mentioned her name. The world didn't need to know who she was. It just needed to remember what she stood for. The narrator slows, voice full of quiet moral gravity. You can erase a name, you can bury a story, but you can't kill what it teaches. Months later, in a small fishing town no one paid attention to, Rachel Winters sat on a pier with a cup of coffee and watched the sun rise. A kid, maybe 15, walked up shy. "Miss, can I ask you something?" Rachel smiled faintly. "Sure." He hesitated. "Were you ever in the military?" She thought for a moment. "Once. Why?" He shrugged. "There's this voice they play in training videos, someone who says, 'Trust me, move south, I'll bring you home.'" Rachel froze, then smiled softly. "Good words, hope they help you." "They do," the kid said. "They make us believe we'll make it back." She looked at him, at the youth, the innocence, the unbroken spirit, and said quietly, "Then that's all that matters." He nodded, grinning, and ran off down the dock. Rachel watched him go, the sunlight catching the water around her boots. Then she whispered to the sea, as if to the ghosts who'd followed her this far. "Mission complete." The narrator's tone fades into warmth and reflection. She never wanted medals, statues, or stories. Just peace, the kind that doesn't need witnesses, because in the end, some heroes don't vanish. They just step quietly into the world they saved and keep it turning. What happens when the world builds an idol out of someone who only wanted to disappear? It started small, just whispers. A few soldiers in remote outposts began writing Phantom 7 on their helmets. Not out of superstition, but out of respect. They said it reminded them to stay calm under fire, to keep breathing, to lead even when no one was watching. The narrator's voice slows, gentle but charged with awe. You can't bury an idea. You can't kill a voice that taught people how to survive. Within a year, the Phantom Code became part of unofficial doctrine across multiple Allied bases. 4 words borrowed from her voice, carved into every combat manual she never signed. Calm, move, think, return. The Pentagon never confirmed where those words came from. They didn't have to. Everyone who'd ever served knew. Meanwhile, on a forgotten coastline, Rachel Winters lived in silence. Days spent fixing nets, painting hulls, helping old fishermen patch their boats. To them, she was just quiet, strong, dependable. Sometimes at dawn, she'd sit on the pier and listen to the radios crackling from the boats going out to sea. Voices drifting through static, calm, tired, human. And every now and then, she'd hear someone say it. Calm, move, think, return. Her lips would twitch, not quite a smile, not quite grief. Just the understanding that somehow she'd left something behind that mattered. The narrator breathed softly, reflective. She wanted to vanish, but you can't hide from meaning, not when it's been carved into other people's courage. Back at Fort Liberty, General was older now. The lines on his face had deepened, the medals on his chest gathered dust. But every year he returned to a wall one few people knew existed. Not the official memorial. This one was private. In a quiet hallway behind Operations Command, a single plaque hung under dim light. No rank, no date, no last name. Just 2 words. Phantom 7. He would stand there for a long time, remembering. The day she reappeared, the order she gave, the lives she saved. And the look in her eyes when she asked for anonymity. Sometimes he'd whisper, "You got it, Rachel, you got your peace." But he knew peace had a cost, and hers was solitude. The narrator's tone softens, like an old friend telling a secret. There's a kind of bravery that doesn't make noise, the kind that doesn't end when the shooting stops. Thousands of miles away, something unexpected was happening. A journalist was investigating a string of mysterious humanitarian interventions. Pirates stopped before they struck refugee ships, medical aid delivered to remote villages without authorization, drone surveillance rerouted in to save civilians. Every trace led back to one strange digital signature, using outdated ghost unit encryption. the same encryption Phantom 7 used. Didn't believe in myths, but the deeper she dug, the more she found a pattern mercy where no one was watching. Someone was still out there. The narrator's tone builds, threading suspense. And sometimes the ghosts we think are gone are just busy saving someone else. That winter, Rachel Winters found herself at a crossroad she hadn't chosen. It began with a storm, a brutal squall off the Atlantic coast. A fishing vessel had gone missing in high waves. 2 men were still out there. Locals said rescue was impossible. Rachel stood at the edge of the dock, wind slicing through her jacket, rain stinging her face. The Coast Guard's last transmission was faint. Vessel Mayflower II, no signal may have capsized. She looked out into the Black Sea and closed her eyes. Then quietly, no one gets left behind. Within minutes, she'd suited up, borrowed a lifeboat, armed it with flares, rope, and a stubborn will. The waves were merciless, the night near pitch. But she went anyway. The narrator's voice steadies, tense but reverent. There are wars we choose, and there are wars that find us again, disguised as storms. Hours passed, searchlights flickered and died. The world slept. But out there, one small boat fought against the ocean. When dawn broke, the storm had calmed. 2 men were found clinging to the wreckage of the Mayflower II, eyes wide, hands blue with cold. They told rescuers later that they'd seen a figure in the storm, a woman guiding them toward shore, throwing a line through rain so fierce they could barely see her. They said she vanished before help arrived. No one ever found the lifeboat. Only her jacket washed ashore, with a faded patch stitched on the inside. A ghost insignia. The narrator pauses, voice filled with quiet awe. You can fake stories, you can stage legends, but you can't counterfeit selflessness. 2 months later, journalists received an unmarked envelope. No return address. Inside, a simple note written in neat, careful handwriting. Some things don't need names to be remembered. Tell their stories instead. Lard. Along with it, a flash drive. On it, hundreds of field reports, rescues, and unsung missions carried out anonymously. Each one real. Each one impossible to trace. Read for hours, tears in her eyes. This wasn't a single hero. It was a message, a reminder that humanity wasn't lost, even when its heroes went unseen. She never published the sender's name. Instead, she released the files under a title that would shake the world again. The Phantom Archives. Within weeks, the stories went viral. The world found inspiration not in power, but in quiet courage. In nameless people doing the right thing, unseen. Memorials sprang up in unexpected places, on bases, in classrooms, even in neighborhoods torn by conflict. Each one carried the same inscription. For those who act when no one's watching. The narrator's tone glows with emotion, reverent, cinematic. Her legend had become something bigger than her, a reflection of everyone who still believed humanity could be kind, disciplined, and brave in the dark. Back on that small coastal town, Rachel Winters watched the news from a window. She saw the words Phantom Archives scroll across the screen. For a moment, she froze, coffee halfway to her lips. The anchor said, "The anonymous archive has sparked a global movement, reminding the world that heroism doesn't always need a name." Rachel exhaled, not quite laughter, not quite tears. The waitress behind the counter looked at her. "Crazy story, huh?" Rachel smiled faintly. "Yeah, feels familiar." She left a few dollars on the table and walked outside. The air smelled of rain and seaweed, the streets still damp from last night's storm. She walked to the pier, the same place she'd thrown Tyler's tag into the sea months ago. The sun was rising again, a gold line splitting the horizon. She stood there a long time, wind in her hair, eyes on the horizon. And in that moment, she was Phantom 7. Wasn't a soldier. Wasn't a myth. Just a woman who'd finally forgiven herself. The narrator softens, the words lingering like prayer. Forgiveness doesn't erase the past. It just stops it from owning you. Behind her, a small boy ran up, the same one from before. Miss, they're nomming the new rescue program after the Phantom Lady. Isn't that awesome? Rachel turned, smiling. It is. Do you think she's still out there? Rachel knelt, looked the boy in the eyes, and said gently, maybe not where you can see her, but the best ones never really leave. The boy grinned. Then she's like a guardian angel. Rachel looked back at the horizon, something like that. The narrator's tone deepens, poetic, cinematic. And maybe she was. Maybe not in uniform, not on the front lines, but in every life she'd touched, every voice that stayed calm under fire, a part of her still fought. As she turned to walk home, the wind carried a faint echo, not from radios or broadcasts, but from memory itself. Calm, move, think, return. She stopped, smiled, and whispered back, always. The music swells, soft piano over quiet waves. Some heroes fade from history. Others fade into it, becoming the silence that teaches us what courage sounds like. What do you do when the world starts to live by your words, but you're no longer sure you believe them? By the time spring came, the Phantom Archives had evolved into something no one could have predicted. It wasn't a movement anymore, it was a mindset. Cadets recited her code during drills. Civilians shared her phrases in classrooms and protests alike. Her 4 words, calm, move, think, return, had become a kind of quiet religion for the disciplined and the lost. The narrator's voice lingers, reverent and heavy. But Rachel Winters never wanted disciples. She wanted peace, and peace doesn't echo, it just exists. In a small dock town by the coast, Rachel lived her quiet life, helping fishermen, fixing radios, feeding stray cats, blending into the rhythm of tides. But one evening, while mending a torn net under the orange glow of a lamppost, she heard a sound that didn't belong. A low hum, mechanical, deliberate, then a pop of static from a nearby radio she hadn't touched. Ghost net channel, rerouted, distress signal detected. Her hands froze. That frequency, it hadn't been used in years. She switched the radio dial gently, the crackle sharpening into a faint voice. This is Mercy Base, civilian convoy under fire, coordinates grid 52. Rachel stared at the radio as if it had spoken her name. Then a voice she recognized, hoarse, desperate. Any Allied unit, any call sign, we are surrounded. Repeat, surrounded. The transmission cut out. The narrator's tone deepens. For most people, static is silence. But for her, it was memory, the voice of duty clawing its way back from the grave. She sat perfectly still. The ocean murmured below the pier. The stars hung heavy above. Then she whispered to herself, no more wars. But her hand was already reaching for the map pinned above her workbench. Old reflexes never die. They just wait for the next reason. By morning, she'd found out more. A humanitarian convoy, doctors, volunteers, aid workers, had been ambushed in a disputed zone overseas. Communications were jammed, official rescue routes blocked by politics and fear. No one was coming, except maybe her. The narrator pauses, then speaks quietly, almost a whisper. It wasn't about heroism anymore. It was about conscience, that quiet voice that won't let you rest when others are screaming for help. That night, Rachel visited the docks again. A friend, old fisherman named Sam, watched as she loaded supplies onto a small cargo plane that flew weekly shipments out of the nearby airfield. He frowned. You're not planning something stupid, are you? She smiled faintly. Wouldn't call it stupid, just overdue. You don't even have a uniform. Don't need one. He sighed. If you go, you might not come back. She tied down the last crate and looked him in the eye. Then tell them I stayed home. The narrator shifts tone, steady, cinematic heartbeat packing. Some people run from destiny. Others run toward it, even knowing it might be the last thing they do. Rachel boarded the cargo flight under an assumed name. No fanfare, no send-off. She sat by the window, watching clouds swallow the horizon. By the time the plane descended into the rugged terrain of the conflict zone, she had already memorized the map. Rivers, roads, high points, escape routes. On the tarmac, the local commander, a nervous young officer, met her. "You're with the supply convoy." She nodded, was. He frowned, "And now?" She adjusted her bag, voice calm. "Now I'm here to bring them home." The narrator breathed softly, the tone tight with restrained admiration. She'd come back to the fire one last time, not as Phantom 7, not as legend, but as the woman who refused to let the world teach her apathy. 2 days later, she stood on a hillside overlooking the ambush site. Through her binoculars, she saw wrecked trucks, scattered supplies, and faint smoke still rising from the valley below. Movement, heat signatures, enemy patrols circling the perimeter. Her pulse slowed, her breath evened, the old rhythm returned. Calm, move, think, return. She whispered the words not as command, but as prayer. Then she slipped down the slope, using the terrain like an old friend. Hours passed. She reached the first wreck, a truck overturned, its tires still smoldering. Inside, 2 volunteers wounded but alive. They flinched when she appeared, a stranger in worn civilian clothes, face streaked with dust. "Don't move," she said quietly. "You're safe now." They stared. "Who are you?" "Someone who hates unfinished missions." The narrator's tone deepens, paced with rising emotion. It didn't matter that she had no insignia, no authorization. The world had built bureaucracy around saving lives. She'd built instinct. As night fell, she gathered the survivors, 6 in total. 1 medic, 1 journalist, 4 civilians. Pinned under darkness, with no communications, no reinforcements. Rachel worked in silence, calculating routes, listening for patterns in the enemy's movement. Finally, she said, "We move at 400 south. No lights, no sound, keep formation tight. You see me stop, you stop." The medic protested, "Who put you in charge?" Rachel looked up from the map, her eyes steady, unreadable. No one had to. They didn't question her again. The escape began before dawn. The air was cold, heavy with the metallic scent of war, spent shells, smoke, sand. They moved through ravines, brush, over cracked asphalt and bone-dry riverbeds. Rachel led every step, her breathing controlled, senses tuned to the land. At one point, a flare lit the sky, red, unnatural. "Down," she hissed. They froze under scrub and rock as enemy vehicles rumbled past, engines growling. One of the civilians began to panic, whispering prayers too loud. Rachel crawled to him, placed a hand on his shoulder. "Hey, look at me." His eyes were wild with fear. I can't breathe." "You can," she whispered. "One breath at a time, in, out, stay here with me." She waited until his breathing steadied, then nodded once. "Good, let's move." The narrator softens, tender, reverent. She didn't lead with rank. She led with humanity. Because sometimes saving someone's life starts with giving them the strength to take the next breath. By dawn, they reached the riverbed. The extraction zone was 3 kilometers beyond, but a drone now circled overhead. Rachel scanned the sky. "They're tracking thermal." The journalist looked panicked. "Then we're dead." Rachel shook her head. "Not if we stop being warm." She pointed to the muddy river below. "In, now." They hesitated, freezing water, debris, danger. "Move," she ordered softly. "Trust me." One by one, they slid into the current. The mud sucked at their legs, the cold bit deep, but it masked their heat signature perfectly. When the drone passed, the sound faded like thunder rolling away. Rachel exhaled. "Told you." They climbed out the far side, soaked, shivering, but alive. They reached the edge of the evacuation point, just as the sun began to rise. In the distance, rotors, rescue helicopters inbound. Rachel crouched behind a dune, scanning the. Her instincts screamed something wasn't right. Moments later, gunfire erupted, snipers positioned on the high ground, targeting the route. "Cover," she shouted, pulling the civilians down. Bullets kicked up sand inches from their heads. The medic screamed, "We can't make it." Rachel took a breath, calm, controlled. Then quietly, "You can, but I'll draw their eyes." She grabbed a flare gun, sprinted toward the open ridge and fired it high, a red trail slicing across the sky. Instantly, the snipers redirected fire. The sound was deafening. The narrator's tone sharpens, heartbeat pulsing through words. Every step she took bought them seconds. Every second was a life. At the extraction point, the helicopters landed hard, sandstorm whipping through the valley. "Move, move," the pilots shouted. The survivors ran, stumbling, bleeding, crying, towards salvation. Rachel stayed behind, pinned under a rocky ledge, rifle in hand. Her shots came slow, precise, 3, 4, 5. Each one a heartbeat of survival for those running behind her. Then silence, the enemy fire stopped. She lowered her weapon, breathing hard, blood running down her arm from a graze. From the helicopter ramp, the medic shouted, "Come on." Rachel hesitated, eyes on the rising smoke, the same horizon she'd fought on years ago. And then she smiled, a tired, knowing smile. She sprinted through the sand, climbed aboard, collapsing against the cabin wall. The pilot looked at her wide-eyed. "You just saved a dozen lives. Who the hell are you?" Rachel opened her eyes slowly, voice quiet, almost a whisper. "Nobody." The narrator holds the silence, then speaks softly. "It wasn't modesty. It was truth. Heroes who need no names carry the world's weight without asking for witnesses." As the helicopter lifted, the survivors stared at her. The woman who came out of nowhere, led them through hell, and vanished just as quickly. Back at the base, someone caught the moment on a handheld camera. A single frame, Rachel looking out the window, wind in her hair, sunlight spilling across her face. The image would spread across the world within days. The phantom lives. Unknown operative saves civilians in crossfire. The world would celebrate again, the legend reborn. But Rachel Winters didn't see any of it. She slipped away from the base before sunrise, leaving behind only her dog tags and a note on the barracks bunk. "Calm, move, think, return. Mission complete." The narrator's tone softens, fading to quiet reverence. For her, saving lives was never about redemption or duty anymore. It was simply the only language her soul remembered how to speak. That night she sat on a hill overlooking the coast, watching the sea again. For the first time in years, she let herself cry, not from pain but release. And when the tears stopped, she smiled, faint, peaceful, unburdened. She had returned. The narrator's final words for this part come slow and poetic. Maybe heroes aren't meant to live forever in stories. Maybe they're meant to fade back into the crowd they saved, leaving behind only their echo, soft, steady, immortal. What happens when the world's most invisible soldier finishes her last mission? Does she rest? Or does the world simply learn to carry her silence? Weeks passed. No one knew where she went. But her image, that single wind-torn frame of her on the helicopter, traveled everywhere. Murals, tributes, even children's notebooks bore her likeness. They called her the Phantom of Mercy. An angel. A myth reborn from war. But Rachel Winters was just a woman walking along a quiet shoreline with sand in her boots and salt in her hair. A woman tired of being more useful to the world as a ghost than as herself. The narrator's tone softens, slow, contemplative. Sometimes being remembered feels heavier than being forgotten. She rented a small cabin beyond the harbor. No phone, no internet, just an old radio she barely turned on anymore. The nights were calm now. No gunfire, no rotors, only wind through the grass and the whisper of waves folding into the shore. And yet the silence carried questions she couldn't bury. Had she done enough? Had any of it changed anything? Did peace mean anything if it always had to be bought with someone's pain? Far away, General was dying. Lung cancer, the final battle he couldn't command. He refused the hospital bed and spent his last days in a hospice that overlooked the same hills where cadets trained. One morning, he asked the nurse for a favor. "Find someone for me," he said, his voice barely more than gravel. "A woman named Rachel Winters. Tell her I kept my word." The nurse never found her. But 2 weeks later, an envelope arrived anyway, no return address, just a seal stamped with salt stains. Inside was a small scrap of paper. 4 words. "Calm, move, think, return." Smiled through the oxygen mask. "Still teaching me," he whispered. And then quietly he was gone. The narrator pauses, a single breath before continuing. Some goodbyes don't need witnesses, only faith that the message reached its mark. After his death, the Defense Archives released a private memo he'd written years earlier, a reflection on leadership. It read, "If ever the world forgets what courage sounds like, play them her voice, not to worship it, to remind them that fear can be mastered, one calm breath at a time." The memo went public, and for the first time, the world heard the unedited transmission from that gun store operation. Rachel's voice steady in chaos. "I don't need medals, just silence when it's over." The recording spread across every platform. No music, no edits, just her human, grounded real. People didn't cheer this time. They listened. And then they grew quiet. The narrator's tone deepens, reverent, almost prayerful. Because sometimes a single honest voice can calm an entire planet. Back in the coastal town, Rachel heard it too. Not from a broadcast, from a neighbor's window. A family sat around dinner, listening to the old recording, their radio crackling. The little girl asked, "Mama, who is she?" Her mother smiled, "Someone who did the right thing." Rachel closed her eyes. That was enough. Later that night, she walked to the pier one last time. The air was cold. The tide was high. She placed a folded note in a glass bottle and set it adrift. It read, "If this finds anyone, remember that the world changes quietly, in hands no one applauds." She watched it drift until it vanished into the black water. The narrator whispers, "It wasn't goodbye, it was release." Years passed. The world moved on. But her 4 words, calm, move, think, return, became the unofficial creed of every humanitarian task force, every rescue diver, every medic entering chaos. They were printed on the inside of helmets, etched on memorial stones, even whispered by civilians during disasters, storms, and fires. They weren't military words anymore. They were human ones. Then, one day, long after her name had faded from rumor, a coastal rescue team received an anonymous distress ping from the middle of the Atlantic. Old encryption. GhostNet signature. They responded immediately. When they reached the coordinates, they found an empty lifeboat adrift, engine dead, supplies untouched. Inside, a waterproof pouch. One photograph. Rachel Winters standing beside General and the original Ghost unit, all smiling under a desert sun. On the back, a single line written in her hand. "No one left behind, not even ourselves." The narrator's voice softens, trembling with emotion. and that was the last trace of her ever found. No body, no grave, just the endless sea and the echo of words that outlived her. In the years that followed, every generation of soldiers, medics, and quiet ordinary heroes carried her ghost forward. Some wore the patch. Some kept her creed taped inside their lockers. And some, those who'd lost everything, whispered her name before they stepped into the dark. Because to them, she wasn't myth. She was the promise that calm could still exist inside chaos. The narrator pauses, a heartbeat of silence before the final reflection. Maybe she's still out there, somewhere the world doesn't look, watching the tides, helping strangers, saving lives one quiet act at a time. Maybe the phantom never needed to die, because every time someone chooses decency over fear, she lives again. The camera, in the listener's mind, drifts across the ocean, catching the faint shimmer of sunlight over waves. Wind carries her final echo, the same one that started it all. Trust me, move south, I'll bring you home. The music swells soft piano, a single cello fading into stillness. And the narrator delivers the closing moral, slow and poetic. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts. Sometimes the quietest soul leave the loudest legacies. And sometimes, the ones who disappear are the very reason we still believe in humanity at all.